Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from those written by Jane Austen to Shakespeare's works and everything in between for the last 2,500 years, that you might have fallen asleep to reading when you were trying to read them back in high school. We do this for our audience, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or even the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern West we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 95 in chronological order as we creep slowly and carefully up to episode number 100 in chronological order. By the way, at which point I'll stop saying these numbers and it'll just be the podcast. So you'll just have to figure out which number it is by yourself. With our book today, it is a book that is a direct punch in the mouth to the political pieties held at the time of its publication in the 1940s. It describes in graphic and disturbing detail the criminality of the Black underclass in a pre-civil rights era of America and the social, political, and legal results of such criminality during a time when Jim Crow was still active in the South, but in the North, other political and social dynamics were beginning to be at play. This book that we are going to cover today is the first novel by a Black writer to be featured as a main selection of the Book of the Month Club, and it surely shocked its readers at the time. However, in our post-civil rights era of rap culture, underclass criminality and drug use and abuse, and the prevalence of selling of the urban subculture as a pose to aspire to for the middle-class majority, everyone see Kanye West here, I imagine this book, if it's even read anymore, makes much less of an impact than it did after its initial publication. And in thinking about how we were going to frame this book, I think that is the fundamental victory of this book. Today, we will be focusing on the ins and outs of Native Son by Richard Wright. And we will be covering and talking about the original 1940 text in an unabridged version. And of course, we'll be joined today by our regular co-host, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing fantastic, Kason. Thank you. I did want to mention, by the way, I'm not so sure I agree with one of those lines you just read there, or not read, so that you just talked about, where it said that you would imagine this book. Well, I'm not sure I wasn't sure if it was even being read anymore either. But I'm not so sure it makes less of an impact. I think the impact is just different, not necessarily more or less.
Okay. Well, we could talk
and the reason
about
I say
today.
that is because I just recently was talking to my youngest daughter and her boyfriend, who are both seniors in college right now, and both of which who actually read this book in high school. So not too long ago, they were still reading this book in high school.
Okay.
So we were just shooting the breeze about it, and I was actually a little surprised that some of the comments, they were just like, so the impact to them, I think they did have impact by the book, by the way. That's where I was getting at with this. I just don't think it was the same as what the book intended back in 1940. I think the impact is different, but I think it's still there.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that today. Let's chop up the cheddar on that. Because I am in reading this book, I got to admit, like, I had not read it in high school and I had not read it in my early 20s. I first encountered Richard Wright and Native Son in my mid 30s and sort of read a couple of things around it, a couple excerpts from it here and there, in contrast to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which we covered the last episode of this podcast. And these are two different writers, Ralph Ellison and Richard Wright. They're two different writers. They were writing and focusing on two different things. They had two different life experiences, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up here. They both came from similar backgrounds and similar places, but they came to different clearings at the end of the path, right? And when you look at both of them, and by the way, they both knew each other, which is also very interesting. And Richard Wright really did influence Ralph Ellison to write Invisible Man, and encouraged him to go on the road of being a literary, just being an author, right? Encouraged him to go down that road, coming out of Tuskegee. You do definitely see how the Black experience in America, particularly in a modernist lens, pre-civil rights modernist lens, was definitely individualized. And so I looked at it from that perspective, because I was chasing some dragons of my own at the time. Now going back and looking at it and reading it in my mid-40s, I'm struck by different things. We'll talk about some of those things today, but I would be curious to know what college students are thinking about it, because we do live in a different era. I mean, we live in the post BLM era. You know, we live in the post sort of social, not post. We're still in the midst of the social justice roiling in America, and so how is all of that framed in the context of what Wright is trying to do here in his book? Would be very interesting to me to hear some of that. So let me jump in. Let me summarize Native Son a little bit. And again, just for those of you who are joining us, who may have listened to previous episodes, not going to be reading directly from the book today, for a whole variety of different reasons that I really can't get into right now. But we're going to summarize, the book overall, and then we're going to go into different chapters and different pieces of the book and talk about it. And we're going to play off of, we're going to kind of bat it back and forth a little bit between Tom and I today, and hopefully give you a more robust experience with the book, and talk about, of course, what leaders can learn from Native Son. So the book is constructed in a really interesting fashion. And the edition that I have is prefaced by a essay, an introduction written by Richard Wright called How Bigger Was Born, Bigger. And then there's book 1, book 2, and book 3. And book 1 is entitled Fear. Now, in book 1, we introduce the character of Bigger Thomas. He is a boy man. He's only 20. We don't find that out until later, but he's only 20. And at the time we meet him, he is living in a one-room slum style apartment with his mother, his sister, and his brother. And that's his one family, right? And then as we go through the book, we discover that Bigger, much like Tony Soprano, has two families. He has a family in the slum, and he has a family on the street. And both of these families are crowding Bigger Thomas. They are asking him to do things, and they are requiring things of him. And of course, he's requiring things of himself that are making him confused, frightened, and hopeless. And that's a key element in this first chapter, this first book, which is called Fear. Fear is the thing that drives Bigger Thomas, and it drives all of his actions and reactions through the first part of the novel. And it even drives his responses to things that happen in the third part of the novel. Now, the path of overcoming that fear, or the apotheosis of that fear, lies in Bigger's ability to think only in terms of killing. When the book opens up, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when the book opens up, he's killing a rat in his slum. That's the opening scene that we are delivered by Richard Wright. And this is a theme that follows through all of book 1, which wraps up with a horrendous killing that even when I read it, and I've seen, Tom and I are movie guys. I've seen tons of movies. I've seen tons of people who have tons of horrible things happen to them. And it even blew me away. It shocked me that Wright had the ability to really lay out something as cold and as heartless and as cruel as the killing that happens at the end of book one. But killing, criminality, and a persistent inability to conform not to white society. This is something that's very important to understand about Native Son, but a consistent inability to conform to the majority Black society lurks underneath Bigger's social and moral confusion. Just like with Ellison in Invisible Man, Richard Wright's Native Son is not necessarily primarily a screed against white racism, although that's how it's often framed. It is actually a screed against and a critique of the Black bourgeoisie middle class. And we see this as a reflection of the life of Richard Wright. And so we're going to go a little bit into this just to sort of lay the foundation. So Richard Nathaniel Wright was born September 4th, 1908, and died November 28th, 1960, on the cusp of the beginning of the civil rights movement. He wrote novels, short stories, poems, and of course, a whole entire plethora of nonfiction pieces. He was the son of Nathan Wright, a sharecropper, and Ella Wilson, a school teacher. Both sets of Wright's grandparents had been born into slavery and freed because of the war. Richard Wright, when he was born on Rutgers Plantation between Roxy and Natchez, Mississippi. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, I've been to Natchez, Mississippi. It's not great even now. Pardon me. My apologies to all folks who live in Natchez, Mississippi, who might be listening, but it ain't paradise there.
I mean, in fairness, where the book takes place is probably not the greatest either, in Southside Chicago. So again, no offense to people from Chicago, but I'm just saying, like, so in other words, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
They stay the same.
I thought it was fascinating too, the spin on, like, the play on words too. If you read some backstory about the title of the book in Native Son and what he's referring to as the, Native Son being a product of the environment, native to the environment. Like, he's talking about the word native in a very, very calculated way. I thought that was fascinating too. Just simply the name of the book, but I'll let you continue.
Oh yeah. Well, and the name of the main character, Bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, he's playing with language here. He's trying to get a very literate society and literate culture in the 1940s to understand what he's saying.
Yeah.
And he did this on purpose. And the fact that he was able to do it is kind of amazing, because when you look at Richard Wright's life, he had a chaotic upbringing involving family dissolution, beatings and abuse, almost relentless abuse, pretend Christianity. A couple of his aunts, I believe, were Seventh-day Adventists, and they disciplined him with the Bible, which is not what you're supposed to do at all, to say the least. And all of this resulted in a lack of education, such to the point that Wright, who was ultimately an autodidact, which means he could literally read something and pick it up, he received only one whole year of schooling in total by the age of 12. That's insane. And yet, when he moved to Chicago and left the South, he began to flourish. He began to bloom. And so over the course of time, he would get a full education by the age of 18. He was sort of cram it all in. And then during the course of his time in Chicago, he began writing. His writing talent began to manifest, ironically enough, after he fell in with the Marxists of the early 20th century and became a card-carrying and devout communist. He wrote for I was going
to bring that up later.
He wrote for the Chicago version of, or the Black American version of the Daily Worker, while also dealing with constant racial threats and abuse, not from conservative Jim Crow white people. No, not from them, but from liberal, progressive, socialist, and communist white people who still behaved in a manner that was somewhat less than utopian. So only white workers of the world could unite, not white and Black workers of the world. By the way, This led to Richard Wright many years later leaving the United States and moving to France, where he then wrote for many years, again, still publishing, doing nonfiction essays, writing articles for communist newspapers and communist reviews. And of course, during the course of World War II, really having his communism broken, as many genuine devout political Marxists did in the 1940s, having his Marxism broken by the revelation of what exactly Stalin was doing to build his new society in Russia. Richard Wright died in 1960 after an abortive attempt to get into England that failed because he was wrestling and wrangling with the bureaucrats in England. And his second wife, who was also his literary agent, interestingly enough, tried to pull a lot of strings to get him out. And he died of an infection related to a disease he picked up while touring Africa some years before. Richard Wright went a long, long way, but this book, Native Son, and a lot of the writings that he wrote in the course of his life revealed a certain level of bitterness, anger, pride, but also, to the point about Bigger Thomas, a certain level of moral confusion. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. And we're really going to focus on book one in this book. So Tom, we already kind of talked about it a little bit, but Native Son, your reactions to this book, your thoughts on this book. What have you read about it? What have you heard about it? What do you know about it? Let's talk a little bit. Let's chop the chair on this.
Well, I alluded to the first sort of epiphany to it, which was the title. I thought it was very clever. I thought Wright did a really nice job with that. Like, it's not really a play on words, actually. Like, I just like the way that he interpreted the title for himself in that way, in that part. Number one. Number two, I also don't know how many people realized that it was like quasi based on a real event. Like,
Yep.
It was an actual court case where the black guy killed a white girl. And the interesting part of the original court case, and I don't, quite honestly, I don't remember in the book if they even bring this part up, but in the original court case, there was a tremendous amount of contradictory evidence. So in the book, he is flat out guilty, right? Spoil, sorry, but I should have probably said that first, but spoiler alert, in the book, he's flat out guilty. Now, that being said, it was accidental. I get all that, but I don't remember if there was like the trial part, and I don't remember a lot of that. It's been a long time, so but I do remember the original version was there was a tremendous amount of contradictory evidence to the murder. There was no slam dunk that it was definitely the guy, but convicted unanimously because of the jury of quote unquote his peers were 12 white dudes. Like,
right.
I mean, come on, like so. The inevitability of it, I think, is what the reason I'm bringing this up was because I think Wright made the killing part. He made it known to the reader that it was true, like that he was guilty of the murder, to circumvent any of that issue from the actual criminal case. But so that those are the two things that really stood out to me the most, I think. And to your point earlier, what you alluded to, the style, the version, the way the murder would definitely be it would stand up to today's cinematography. It would stand up to today's storytellers, the Stephen King world, the John Carpenters of the world. Like, it would stand up with those guys for sure. But I just want to not correct you, because it's not really a correction of sorts, but it wasn't the actual murder. It was what he did after the fact. There was the awe factor. I was like, wait.
I don't know. The murder got to me. It really did. Not well. Yeah. Like, okay. So I got to be honest. I kind of saw it coming. from the
Of course,
beginning,
yeah.
you know, because
Same.
and we'll talk a little bit as we break apart this
And
chapter.
speaking of why has this not been a movie yet? Like, I think this would be a fascinating movie, by the way.
I think it hasn't been a movie because so many of the tropes that Richard Wright caught into the or drew into the book have become, and again, this is sort of something that I pointed out in my initial introduction, they've become part of the pose of the black underclass, so much so that we just sort of, and by the way, we meaning, here's the we, I want to be very clear on this podcast, this episode today, who I'm talking about when I talk about we meaning middle class, bourgeoisie, cross all race people just accept as this is the criminal other. Those tropes since like 1940 over the last 80 years have become so embedded into our cinema and our popular culture. Heck, rap music. I wasn't going to bring this up initially, but let's go there. Rap music,
Sure.
okay? The kinds of things. Look, and I have some legitimacy here. I know every Dre song ever made. I know every Snoop Dogg song ever made. Jay-Z, I know almost every Jay-Z song except for that fourth album where he kind of went off the rails. I I know my NWA, I know my Biggie, I know all of it. But what are they actually rapping about? So those are my bona fides. You're welcome. So what are they actually rapping about? They're rapping about doing criminal behavior.
Yeah.
So it's been so embedded into our culture that I don't think this would make an imp. Well, like I said, I don't think it would make an impact. I think you could do it, but the only way you could do it is if you took it. You would have to do it in a clear-eyed way that wouldn't be pushing an ideology one way or another. I don't know if we have writers anywhere in Hollywood that are talented enough or capable enough to do that.
You know, actually, I was looking at it from a different perspective. I was thinking that I was like, I would love to see somebody like Jordan Peele take this. The spins and twists that guy could put on this, I think it would be fascinating.
You have a lot more faith in Jordan Peele than I do.
What's that?
I said you have a lot more faith in Jordan Peele than I do.
I have a lot more hopefulness, not necessarily faith.
Okay.
But let's be realistic. But anyway, but again, to your point about impact, I think there's some subtle undertones here that people forget. Like, for example, that her boyfriend, the girl who died's boyfriend, is the one that gets him an attorney who he, like, all of a sudden really buys into. Like, he completely changes his outlook on life, not life, but on the circumstances, because this guy has I just think there's some underlying tones here that could play very well in today's world if we spun them right. I think if we just went, and again, every movie we've ever had come from a book, it's always an interpretation of the book, right? Like,
Correct,
it's never verbatim. Like, they just can't do that. The books are way too well written, you know. And I go back to, you know, and I only bring up Stephen King because reading his books and watching his movies are like two completely different experiences. I mean, they're just really far off. So, and I know that we've had other genres to do that. If you look at the Jack Reachers of the world, and, you know, whatever, I get it, everybody, I get it. The books are night and day, but I do think there's some real subtleties here that I think we could actually learn from today because of how numb we are to some of this stuff now. Kind of like to what you were just talking about, like some of the stuff that we hear coming out of rap, that we hear coming out of these poor neighborhoods and whatnot. Which, by the way, folks, I just raised my hand, which was me. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood. I was one of those hood rats. Like, I get it. I get, like, some of these things like that. So but I think that Wright captures things in microcosms that I don't think today's writers understand or see, because he has a different perspective of it. But I think if we took a book like that and we actually showcased it and really laid into it, I think we could really learn something from it. I really do.
So,
oh, by the way, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but one more thing. But I think that the right writer and director would have no choice but to take that original court case into consideration when they were trying to interpret the book. right?
So
Like
I think yes, I absolutely agree. I think maybe a John Singletary or Antoine Fuqua,
Fuqua, maybe, yeah.
not Jordan Peele. Maybe
I just
directing,
like Jordan.
maybe I know you just like Jordan Peele. Maybe directing a script written by Jordan Peele where Peele has to sit with Native Son and has to sit with the original court case and has to do some interesting analysis. But again, that would require a whole like supplanting of egos that we don't usually see happen in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But I think the direction from an Antoine Fuqua, and actually I would probably take Fuqua over Singletary, but that's neither here nor there. And I think John Singletary passed away actually, so I would have to take Antoine Fuqua. But I think that he could do the story justice with dignity, which is the part of the elements here, and I want to talk about this today, that are inside of this novel. Because again, just like Invisible Man, Wright's main focus was not on white society. It really
Right.
wasn't, because for pre-civil rights Black America, and Wright gets this. He actually lays this out in the book in the first
Well, he
chapter.
lived
Well,
it, so
he
yeah,
lived
I
it,
would
right?
hope.
He lived it. You know, it was there's a line in here that Bigger says when him and his friends are messing around before they go to the movie theater. And Bigger says something to the effect of white people are like they're like the sun or the sky or the moon. They're just there. And you can't overcome the sun or the sky or the moon. You just have to sort of exist underneath it. And like, what are you gonna do? Yeah, you're not gonna reach up and put out the sun. Like, that's not gonna happen. So you have to
Right.
sort of operate in whatever the environment is that they set. And
It's
then
like
he
a version
jumps.
you have to play the cards you're dealt, right? Like
Yeah,
that's like
right.
his way of saying that.
And then he also juxtaposes that with, and I want to talk about Malcolm X's. This is why I sent you the link to the Malcolm X video. This sort of Malcolm X Nation of Islam idea, which has, by the way, passed down into the more radical areas of Black intellectual thought in our time. But this idea that, and I'll tip my hand early, there's nothing worse than a white liberal. There's just nothing worse than a liberal white person. And Malcolm X was notorious for saying that. He would much rather deal with the conservative hood wearing KKK than someone coming to him in a suit with a suitcase and a tie from like Berkeley. Because the person from Berkeley would seduce, and he did say this, would basically seduce the Black man into giving away his rights and being replaced and being supplanted, whereas the hood wearing KKK member just wanted to hang you and kill you. Like, you could deal with that because that guy's a lot more direct.
Into Malcolm X's defense, you also don't know, because a lot of especially back then, it was situational racism, right? Like,
Correct.
it was situational. They could be in the public eye talking about equality and civil rights and all this other stuff, and then behind closed doors. And I'm going to bring up something that you and I talked about earlier today, because I just think it's pertinent here.
Yep.
Hassan asked, we were talking about this topic of racism, and very lightly, lightly, but we were talking about like Hassan said something about would I allow my daughter to marry him, and I said, well, no, but that's just because the age gap, like. My daughter's 20, but your son, I would have no problem having your son marry, like, another 20 something. Sure. Like, but back then, what Malcolm X was referring to was that situational racism where
right.
publicly people that look like me would say, we want equality, Black rights, we're your ally. And then my daughter shows up with a black man as a boyfriend, and I'm going, what the hell are you thinking? Like,
right.
That's what he like, and he was right, by the way, because I feel the exact same way, like in a lot of times, that it's in a sense of, it's easier to deal with somebody who is straight up telling you they don't like you for whatever godforsaken reason. I'm
Yeah.
I swear to God, if I ever met somebody in the KKK, I think I would actually punch them, but whatever, that's not the point. But I'm saying, like, for even if they have a legitimate reason not to like me, I would rather that than deal with the facade of it, right? Like,
right.
And that's kind of what he was talking about, where you just didn't know what you were going to get. You had no idea what that white man with the suitcase and the suit. You didn't know the real him because
Right.
he or she could have been one way public facing and a different way in private. Whereas the KKK was who they were right up front and in behind closed doors. They were just, and that was just easier to understand and cope with. And that's no different than today, by the way.
Right.
Take the racism out of it. Just in general, just people in general, it's easier to deal with people who are upfront and honest with you 100% of the time, whether you like it or not, versus people who are not, and
Right.
they're hiding behind this or that and trying to be some,
And Wright saw this, and we'll go back to the book here in just a second, but Wright saw this in his political dealings.
yeah.
So he bought in, and I said this on our episode with covering Invisible Man with Ellison. You can go back and listen to the argument that I had with DeRollo, not argument, but the discussion I had with DeRollo Nixon about this because he disagreed with me. I will say this again. I don't fault anybody who was alive in the early 20th century for genuinely wanting to believe that Marxism as a political solution would work, because for the first 25 years, from 1916, no, the first 30 years, from about 1916 to about the mid 1930s, Marxism for sure had not been fully tried as a political theory with all of the subsequent outcomes. It hadn't been fully tried yet.
So you're saying they had no firm foundation of success or failure. So why would you
Correct. Because all the data,
somebody who,
right? All the data wasn't in. All
I
of
was
that
about
stuff.
to jump on your boys bandwagon, but I understand what you're saying.
That's okay.
No, I understand.
Well,
no, it's fine. I understand what you mean.
Just to present his argument, he says you should know from human nature that, and he argues from human nature, you should know from human nature that a system like that proposed wouldn't work. It's an envy machine, to borrow DeRollo Nixon's phrase. And when you turn on the envy machine, it's going to wind up in a certain place based on human nature. And you could just look at thousands of years of human nature and just see that. Okay, maybe. But I do fault, and I do have a problem with people born after, and we talked about on the last episode, we talked about George Orwell's Animal Farm, which Orwell was a man of the political left who wrote Animal Farm, published it in 1945, and that was the beginning crack in the dam on political Marxism being a failure. 1945, okay? That was the beginning of people finding out about Stalin's purges. That was the beginning of finding out that Stalin killed Leon Trotsky, and that a revolution from the center left inside of communism wasn't going to work against the hardliners. It was the beginning of finding out about how many people Stalin killed in his gulags, and what he was actually going to do in Eastern Europe. That was, again, the logical conclusion of political Marxism. So people who lived at that time and were going through that, got it. You didn't have all the data. I'll give you a pass. But if you were born after that, like if you're born in like 1965 and you're trying to tell me that like, well, Marxism just hasn't been tried yet, we need to go and try it again. I'm going to laugh. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to laugh you out of town. I'm going to laugh you out of town because we now have data. We now have proof that this is the clearing at the end of the path that it winds up in. And by the way, people will Pache Richard Wright, but people will then convert to, well, we'll just do cultural Marxism, and surely if you just inject Marxism into the culture, surely everything will work out just fine. America can withstand that. No, then you wind up with rioting, and you wind up with looting, and you wind up with a bunch of other social pathologies, which we can see in the culture. We have proof. And I think I've got some strong arguments there that push back against this idea of cultural Marxism being the panacea, or that it's not been fully tried. So I say all that to say this. Wright had those racial experiences of the people who were saying one thing about the revolution, but were blackballing him, no pun intended, from hotels in Manhattan when he went to a communist conference in Manhattan.
Yeah.
You guys are supposed to be my brothers. We're all supposed to be united. For God's sakes, I wrote 200 articles for the Daily Worker. I'm a card-carrying communist. And yeah, I can't stay in this hotel. You're telling me no blacks allowed. What are we doing here?
Yeah. I mean, that's literally exactly what Malcolm X was referring
This is
to.
exactly what Malcolm X is referring to.
Exactly.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think Malcolm X probably got it from Richard Wright, honestly, or came to it, sort of in the same kind of way. And so Wright is writing Native Son as an indictment on white liberals, but also, and we're going to go into this in the beginning of it, also as an indictment of the black middle class, the Booker T. Washington black middle class. So I want to talk a little bit about. Let's talk a little bit about that. Um, so when we look at the first part of Native Son, the first book one, Fear, which is again is what we're going to really focus on today. I'm reminded of the line from Bubs in The Wire, where he said, "It's a thin line between heaven and here." And we talked a little bit about Bigger's fear, but it really begins with this idea of Bigger Thomas having two families. And so the one family he has with his mom, his sister, his brother, his younger brother, they are a family who is requiring of him some things. They're requiring him to, even though they are underclass, even though they are poor, even though they are living in a squalid apartment with a dead rat in it, even though they have one room and they have to turn to the corner so that everybody can get dressed, so there's some measure of privacy, right? um Even in that situation, they are asking Bigger to conform to a societal standard that Bigger is afraid to conform to. He doesn't feel like he has the agency. That's the word I'm looking for. The agency to do that. And he doesn't see heaven, by the way, from there, because when he goes out on the street, he sees black people engaging with each other, middle class black people, underclass black people. He sees them engaging with each other, but he draws a comparison in those engagements he sees among the black people that he knows. He draws a comparison or a contrast to the overall dominant white culture that he sees. And he feels a sense of fear and a sense of tension. And then he goes to his other family, his criminal family, with Gus and GH and Jack. And there's a whole thing in the first part of this book where the three of them, Bigger, Gus, GH, and Jack, the four of them, try to and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but they try to put together a robbery and they can't. They don't know. They actually don't know how to do it. Now they know how to rip off other black people.
Black people, right? I thought that part was not funny, but I was like, wait a minute. What?
But you see this even today. So I lived in Detroit for many years, and one of the things that and I lived on the other side of 8 Mile, and one of the things that drove me absolutely crazy, just looking at it with logic, is I'd walk. I mean, I would. The bus stop was over here. I have to walk past all the drug dealers and all the nonsense and then get to my apartment, right? And it was 3-4 times a week thing. It's whatever. And those guys, I played basketball with them. They knew enough to like not sell me anything because I wasn't going to buy anything and just leave me alone. Let me go about my business. Plus, I was also like in my early 20s, so it was a different kind of dynamic than being a teenager, right? They weren't gonna toss me over, and it was going to be a grown man sized problem, right? Okay. But you watch in those environments, those kinds of tensions happen. And I always wondered, why don't you just cross 8 Mile and go sell to the white people over there? Because the white people will come over here. They will. They'll come in their cars. They will. They'll come in their cars. They'll drive down here. They'll get the drugs. They'll drive right back over there. They'll drive right back across 8 Mile. But you won't go across 8 Mile to sell them drugs. I couldn't comprehend that for many, many years. I didn't understand. And I kind of came to not the conclusion that Richard Wright came to, but I kind of came to the idea that the Bubs had in The Wire. Heaven's over there and I'm over here. And I can't get over that. I don't have a conception of getting over there. It doesn't even occur to me that that's a possibility. And that's the thing that Bigger has with his crew. He's got that conception of, I can rob these black people, but to go off and put together a robbery to do something else. And by the way, it all collapses. We'll talk about that in the next little clip here. But, to put together that, the sense of fear that just rises up in him and begins to drive him is a level of dysfunctionality that I think Wright did an excellent job of capturing. I mean, this is an excellent book for that because it captures the internal psychology of a person who feels trapped like a rat and doesn't know where to go and how to get out. And so he captured that tension perfectly in this. And of course, the question I ask, because this is a leadership podcast, it's not necessarily a book podcast, is what can leaders take from understanding this fear? Because sometimes leaders will be trapped between two poles, right? We'll be trapped between two poles, and what are they going to do there?
Well, can I go back to your Detroit metaphor here? Because
yeah, go ahead.
I actually think there is a business lesson to be learned there, and I don't think that the drug dealers went to business school to figure it out. But it's almost like an inherent thing that they know. It's all about supply or demand, right? Like, so
Sure.
if you're a business owner and you have the supply, if you make people come to you, you are in control of the pricing, of the profits, of the like. You're in control. If you go to them, then you lose some of that power. So in your Detroit metaphor there, I think the drug dealers figured out somewhere along the line, if they stay right where they are and the white people come from those neighborhoods over to them, that they can sell it at a higher price. They get better. They get like, and by the way, they don't have to do anything. They can just stand there and be lazy, and the buyers come to them, versus having to actually think and do and perform and have a plan. And which is, again, go back to the book, is what the whole problem was. The black people
Right.
that they were robbing were right there. They didn't
Right.
need like extravagant plans to do it. They knew them. They knew their routines. They knew everything about them. Everything they needed to know was sitting right in front of them. When they went across the tracks to the white business, there was too many variables that they had no idea about. So the idea that let's just call it a bank in the black community versus a bank in the white community. They're both banks, so you should be able to approach this in the exact same way if you're going to rob the bank.
Right.
That's not true.
No.
That is not true. If you're going into an environment where and again, I look at this from a sales and marketing perspective, which is my area of expertise. I am way more comfortable in an area that I am familiar with in the sales and marketing world than just going down a path that I'm not sure of, right? Like, it's the same rules. The same rules apply in your psyche. They just don't, that we're just looking at them through a different lens at this point.
Okay. So one of the things that we struggle with, and I think we've always struggled with, and I think this is a human struggle, not a black or white struggle, or outside of those polarities, any race, creed, color, whatever struggle. I don't think it's that. I think this is a human struggle. Jesus says in the New Testament, the poor you will have with you always. Now, that's been interpreted a bunch of different ways, most notably poor in spirit. Okay. I think he was talking about all of the levels of reality where you can conceptualize poor. You will have those people with you. You just will. It's part of the nature of sort of what we have in the world, right? But we struggle with this idea of agency, that people actually make real choices based on where they are. And yes, look, for sure, we should provide people the opportunities. By the way, Bigger's provided an opportunity. We should provide the opportunities. We should open up the doors. We should. And because two things can be true at the same time that are both uncomfortable, and people will still make decisions based off their own agency. So you said you came from a hardscrabble background. I hung around people with a hardscrabble background. At least
that's why we get along so well.
Good chunk of my life. Well, and you know what? And honestly, I mean, I've said this on the podcast before. Like, I was raised by people who told me you can live in the ghetto, but the ghetto doesn't get to live in you.
Yes.
Not it doesn't have to, it doesn't get to live in you. We don't allow that here. This is our standard. Again, to go back to Tony Soprano for just a second, like when he was yelling at his daughter, I think about dating a black guy, if I remember correctly. He said on that show, played by the great James Gandolfini, it may be 2004 outside this house, but it's 1950 at this dinner table. And I'm like, well, okay, that's all right. That's your standard. That's and of course his daughter Meadow rolls her eyes and goes and does whatever she wants. But the reality that I was raised with was this is the thing that we're conforming to here. and forget everybody else because you have independent agency. You can say no. Okay. We, I think, as middle class folks, struggle with the idea that people in poverty have agency, but they do.
They certainly do.
And the reason we struggle with it, I think, is because we want to make the poverty of their circumstances the only defining aspect of their character or their experience, and it's not.
No, and again, I think, and I can only speak from experience when I say I grew up. I grew up in a housing project. I grew up in a really bad neighborhood. It was drug ridden. It was crime ridden. Everything that you see in the movies. I mean, when I watch The Wire, I look at those housing projects and I'm like, what's the big deal? I live there. Like,
That's fine.
Now, granted, Boston, just for the record, Boston is not as bad as Baltimore. Baltimore is probably one of the worst cities in our country.
Yeah.
And you know, you being in Detroit, I think Baltimore and Detroit usually they fight over who wants to be worse. Like I get that. So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to compare Baltimore to my circumstances, but the reality of it is, in any large city across the country, the housing projects are just terrible. Let's just face it, right? But let's pile some more stereotype on here. I didn't know my dad.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was terrible. She was horrible. Sorry, but she was just a horrible mother. Nobody gave me direction or cared about how well I did in school or cared about whether I stay out of. Nobody as an adult in my childhood cared if I was in trouble or not, or doing drugs or not, or selling drugs or not, or whatever. So it was on me. I had nobody else to tell me that this was wrong. Don't do that. Don't do like it was on me. So I made a very conscious decision that school was more important than home.
Mm-hmm.
That was my out. That was my sanctuary.
Yeah.
My school, I think school started at like 8:15 when I was a kid. I was at the school by 7 a.m. every day. That extra hour and 15 minutes was like peaceful to me. That was like a time that I had to myself, that I had no fear. I had no worry. It was like my fantasy island, right?
Mm-hmm.
And school got out at I think it got out at like 2:15 or 2:30 or something like that. And I was the kid that always stayed behind in school to help clean up, and I helped the janitors. And I didn't leave school till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
right?
Because that was my safe space. And
Yeah.
There was no peer pressure, nothing, that I didn't have to worry about anything. But because of that, and yes, you guys can all speculate whether I got bullied or made fun of in school. Yeah, there was a lot of that. I get fine. I don't care. That's why I took martial arts for 10 years and nobody bothered me after that. Just letting you know. So
that's how you fix that problem. I found the same solution with the problem.
Yeah. So, but again, in the early parts of that, when I was in first, second, third, fourth grade, you're talking about a second grader going to school at 7 a.m. just to get out of the house, right. Like just to be not be home. And so again, circumstances are what they are, but they did not dictate to me how I was supposed to act or how I felt I should have acted. Right. I decided that. I woke up every day and said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. And I had teachers that were Black, white, Asian, like the teacher, the race of the teacher didn't matter, because I was an inner city poor kid that all the teachers felt like they had to save me. Like,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, mm-hmm. And there was a group of us. I'm again, just being honest. There was a group of us, and we were all different ages. I mean, not age. Sorry, we were all different races in that group of us. It wasn't a predominantly white neighborhood or a predominantly Black neighborhood, or it was definitely a melting pot. I had Vietnamese kids in my group, like, and the kids that we hung around with were there was Vietnamese, Haitian, a Black, Hispanic from all over. Like there was a group of about 8 of us or whatnot that kind of grew up together, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of white kids. I was not the only one. There was probably like 3 of us. There was like 3 white kids, a couple of Black kids, a couple of Vietnamese kids. Like there was, anyway. But the whole group of us. Now, if you look at us today versus our peers, I will tell you that out of the 8 or 10 of us that were kind of like really good friends, 7, I think, are in decent jobs, good families, don't live in that environment anymore, really moved up. Like, and again, these are all races. These are not just like, as a matter of fact, 2 one other white kid was the only other one that got out. We had two other white friends. Neither of them got out of the projects. To
Hmm.
this day, they're 50 years old. They still live there. So, again, it's not racially charged in my circumstance, but I think it's just simply because we had a variety of races in the group. Like I don't
Right.
is the group of us that were friends. I think again, I think the neighborhood was there was a dominant race in the neighborhood. I'll leave that
Hmm.
out. I don't think that matters, but
Sure.
but the group of us were not. We were very mixed races, but we grew up and we grew up caring about each other. Like that was the other thing I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Like we didn't care. I didn't care. And we protected each other from our own race for crying out loud, which is the other thing that blew my mind as a kid. And again, this is not stereotyping. This is what I actually went through. So I'm just
Hmm.
just clear. I'm not making a reference to what I think happened. Like this is what we went through. We would have the black kids, or especially the Vietnamese kids. They probably got it worse than any of them. But like
Hmm.
the Vietnamese gangs that were trying to get those kids to not pay attention to school, it was crazy, man. These kids were getting beat up. Like, and the group of us were defending them every day. Like it was
Hmm.
like it was nuts. It was nuts.
Yeah. Well, and
But I go back to what I was talking about earlier, and I know I got off track a little bit
no,
there. I
no.
apologize, but like when you're planning to rob something in your neighborhood that looks and feels the way that you expect it to, versus robbing something that is in a different neighborhood. I get it. I read that part. I was like, oh, I get that. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that either. Back then, I would not have been able to do that. I just know I wouldn't have.
Well, okay. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that fear, because there's an interesting spot in the first part of book one where after Bigger kills the rat with his brother's help and then scares his sister with the dead rat, then his mom's like yelling at him to like go out and get a job, basically. Um, he um he sees a poster go up for the state's attorney general candidate, and Buckley, and he sort of dismisses the candidate as being corrupt, but he lusts for that corruption, right? He lusts to be in that world, and you see it later on when he's in the movie theater watching the two movies, which I want to bring up here: the Trader's Horn and then the Gay Woman, which is really interesting. But when he sees that candidate's poster go up, he has a palpable sense of fear, and it's this fear that sort of runs through. Um, I know that when I was a kid, and by the way, even to this day, I can't stand rats. Like I can't. I can't abide by infestation. It drives me crazy.
I
I
mean,
do
they're good for
scream.
feeding snakes.
I do scream like a little girl. I got a bunch of cats. The cats cleared my rat problem out, or my mouse problem out. My wife tells me there's a difference between a mouse and a rat. I don't see a difference. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what the biological designations are. Rodents, rodentia. Forget it. Done. No. Like Indiana Jones hates snakes. I hate rats. I hate them. Okay. um, and so I associated a little bit with that in the book, with that visceral sense of fear. But then as we go through the chapter, it becomes more and more and more and more palpable. And the only way that he gets catharsis from this fear is through the murder. Um, I've never been that afraid of somebody else in another ethnic group ever. Now, maybe that's because I grew up in a different era, in a different time on the other side of all of that, where the societal structures that Richard Wright was writing against, yeah, they may have had some power, but not nearly the kind of power that they had in Wright's time. I mean, I was born almost 40 years after the publication of Native Son. A lot can change in 40 years. And that's something else that we don't talk about a lot in America. This is where, much like Bill Maher, he of Real Time with Bill Maher, I also get off the train of the progressive social justice leftists, because they can't acknowledge that there's been actual substantive change in our culture, actual substantive change. I actually put out a podcast uh, on the day before this one that you can go back and listen to. Or basically, I postulate that at a certain point in America in history, and I think it's coming up really quickly here, the black-white dichotomy isn't going to matter much anymore. I think that's coming up fairly quickly here. And I think it's coming up fairly quickly in that Black Americans will just be Americans. And I don't think that I think that there are certain classes inside of Black culture that just aren't ready for that switch, but it's going to happen whether they're ready for it or not. Just like it's happened to every other ethnic group in America and every other quote unquote minority group in America, particularly as the former majority becomes less of a majority and the former minorities, including minorities we don't talk about, like Hispanics and Latinos, become more of the majority, not less. There's going to be some racial solidarity. Now, you don't see that obviously in 1940 in Richard Wright. Instead, you see that fear. And I want to bring this into leadership because how does the leader operate inside of fear? Because I do know leaders that are fearful all the time, right? They have that the same sort of visceral fear, not from the same root, but the same kind of fear that Bigger Thomas had. A fear of making a decision, a fear of going one way or another, a fear of crossing the street because they don't know that environment. How do they navigate that fear? How do you do that if you're a leader?
Well, I guess the more important question is what is the foundation of the fear, and what is the fear based out of? Because until you know that, you can't answer the question, right? Like, for example, what I mean by that is, like, so you're a leader, you're running a company, it's X number of employees, 200, 500, whatever, it doesn't really matter. That part's irrelevant. But are you worried that if you don't hit your number next month that you have to lay off 20 people? So where's your fear rooted? Is it in sales and marketing that that your revenue isn't there? Is are you pending a lawsuit that somebody could sue you to close your company down tomorrow if they win? Like, the fear needs to be understood before you can really answer it. But I do think there is a foundational answer here, that to overcome fear, that your actions have to come from substance. Your actions have to come from some sort of education, some sort of foundational knowledge. Like, your answer has to come from some sort of genuine understanding of what the problem is. And if you don't know how to fix it, going and finding the right people to help you, i.e., you're getting sued, get a really good attorney. You have a sales and marketing problem, and you have sales and marketing people in your company, maybe they're not the right fit. Go find somebody that can help you. I'm just saying that there has to be a foundation of knowledge of the fear and of the result that you're hoping for in order to even overcome it in the first place. Now, all that being said, I do think there are certain types of fears that leaders deal with that I don't think we have that kind of foundation for. One particular topic you and I were talking about earlier today. So when you and it's a real it's a big thing to, like, we're talking about, like, DEI, right? So
Yeah.
leaders fear DEI because they have no idea if the program they're implementing is going to be good, bad, indifferent, if the employees are going to like it, not like it, hate the company because they are pushing a certain agenda, policies they don't understand. Like, there's a whole lot of unknowns behind. And I've actually seen companies do this where they'll bring on, like, a brand new DEI officer, but not give them enough power to really do anything. So they're not at the executive level. They're more like at the management level. And you put them at the management level, which means you're basically tying their hands unless they're, so either put them at the executive level or don't do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's certain, and they're fearful of putting me at the executive level because they don't know what they don't know. So I think.
No, you're right. No, you're right. Go ahead. Yeah, no. Well, and well, okay. I'll get back to DEI in a minute. There's a larger issue here of, particularly in that little piece there where Bigger's out on the street and looking at the poster, the larger issue of corruption, right? So leaders face corruption all the time, right?
Yes.
And the him looking at the poster and then him being jealous of that thing is a foreshadowing to what will happen later, right? And how he'll deal with the corruption, right? Again, a very interesting narrative trope there that Wright uses in order to throw us forward and kind of give away the game a little bit. Okay. Yeah, leaders can deal with fear by fixing what the root of it is, whatever that may be. But corruption's a little bit harder because corruption is, to your point about the guy with the suitcase who's coming to help you. Corruption usually comes in the form of a guy in a suitcase, or not in a suitcase, but a guy carrying a suitcase with a tie on, right? It almost
and a hidden agenda.
And a hidden agenda, right? And it almost never comes in overalls and a cowboy hat. It almost never, even in Texas where I live, it almost never comes that way. Even though everybody here walks around in cowboy hats with belt buckles on, ironically, that's just a thing. What are leaders to do? And this is a really critical question, I think, in our time, because there's so many opportunities to, and I kind of wasn't going to bring this up, but what the hell, I'll go there. There's so many opportunities to grift and hustle based on manipulating people's emotions. Case in point. Now I'll go back to DEI. If I want to make a bunch of money, if I wanted to make a bunch of money in the last 4 years, it would not have been difficult for me to position myself as a DEI expert. I have the appropriate level of melanin in my skin. I am marketed correctly on LinkedIn. I speak clearly and well and know all of the shibboleths and the things to say. I know how to design programs. And I also know, and this is something very important, I know what the trigger words are to get me into or get the attention of an executive who is scared of a racial problem or scared of a diversity problem or scared of an inclusion problem. I'm not saying that I could get the attention of someone at the level of Mark Cuban in the Dallas Mavericks, but I am saying that over the last 4 years, if I had really wanted to, regardless of what my internal thoughts may be about DEI or the efficacy of any of that, I could have positioned myself on the grift and made quite a. I mean, I would have raked in 4 years of 6 figures a year. Not a problem. Would not have been hard. And what annoys me is there are genuine places where perhaps diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm going to be generous and gracious here, where perhaps the ideas behind diversity, equity, and inclusion could actually make a lot of difference in a lot of people's lives. And I don't know who's corrupt and who's not. And so if I'm a leader, how do I spot the corruption? If I don't know what I don't know, and I'm bringing in this person, not specifically a DI, we can apply this to anything, sales and marketing, right? There's how many corrupt sales and marketing guys are there out there and women who are just peddling trash all over the internet. And you don't have to name names, just saying how many of them are there, right? And you know they are, by the way. You know they are because you have the professional knowledge, just like I do in leadership development. I know in leadership development who's peddling trash, who's peddling snake oil. I know exactly who the snake oil salesmen are. And women, by the way. I know precisely who they are. And it's not something where I go, oh, immediately based on what they said. It's a feeling you get because you just kind of know. Yeah. And yet you see so many leaders because they don't know what they don't know about sales and marketing, or I see they don't know what they don't know about leadership, or they're afraid of an identity issue exploding in their organization that they fall for a corrupt system or approach. How do leaders get more savvy around this corruption piece? How do they become more in tune with that? Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
I mean, I think there's a little bit of something to be said about like just getting some egg on your face, right? Like hire somebody, fail, and go, I'm not doing that again, right? Like there's a little bit of that. Like, I mean, you have to have some sort of ownership if you do hire the wrong consultant or the wrong key employee. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to, I'll just give you an example. I was talking to one of my it's actually not a client, it was just a potential client for me, and he was talking about hiring these sales managers that came in and they were terrible, and he's done it, like, he's owned his company for 12 years, he's done it 4 times. So 4 times he's had 4 different sales managers that have been terrible. Now he's gun shy at bringing in a sales manager, and I went, you should be, because you don't know what you're doing. And it was so in that case, to what you're talking about, Hassan, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So what I would offer him to help, you don't need me to consult. Like you have a good enough company, you have a foundational company. It's a really good service. Like you got a really good foundation for your company.
Mm-hmm.
Let me help you sift through the minutia of finding a real sales manager. You don't need me to come in and tell you how to fix your sales process. You need me to help. Like I go, so let me help you interview people. I'll teach you how to interview salespeople so that you can actually identify what the crap is that they're talking. Like, to your point, to what you're talking about, because I know better than he does. I know better than when people are going to snow me or try. I know what they're going to say when they want me to think that they're better than they really are. Right. Like, so I go, but now let me just say one other thing about this. But then I looked at what he was asking them to do, and most of his failures were his fault, because he didn't, on the flip side of this, he didn't know how to have a sales manager on his staff.
Okay.
So then I looked at him and I went, well, you need to fix that first. So talk to me about what your expectations of that person are. What do you like? So then, and again, I did it. He wasn't even a client. He was just a guy I met, and I knew him. Like, and I did this over the course of like 2 months. And it dawned on me afterwards that I should have been charging him for my time, but I didn't. I was just trying to help a guy out because he looked like he was.
Well, that's how we know. Really, that's how we know you're not grifting or hustling.
Well, I mean, maybe, but
that's how we know. That's how we know. But go ahead, keep going. No, because I want to get to another point. Go ahead.
But so then once I figured out, like, so I went through these hires. What did they do? Why did they fail? What happened? Tell me about it. Tell me about this. And then I went, well, how did you set them up? Like, what did your job description look like? How did this look? And I went through the whole thing with him, and then finally figured out that it was definitely a combination. Mm-hmm. The guys he had in there would have failed either way. I get that. But it was his laying out his expectations and what he thought the sales manager's roles and responsibilities were really far off of what the people he was hiring expected. Like, there was no matching of the expectation of roles and responsibilities. Like they were on different playing fields.
Yeah. So, no, there's an idea in jiu-jitsu when you first start that you have to learn. And I'm always going to bring up jiu-jitsu once every podcast. So there you go, folks. This is my reference for today. But there's this idea that if you get injured, it's your fault.
Sure. Yeah.
It just is. Oh, that arm bar that just got done on you. Oh, you didn't tap soon enough. Guess what? The reason your arm's cracking the next day, the reason your elbow feels like crap, guess what? It's your fault. Or I don't know, you did this thing wrong and you were all spastic and somebody kicked you in the face and now your nose is bleeding. Guess whose fault that is? It's your fault. You should have been less spastic. Like, you should have been less spazzy. Oh, well, I didn't know, or I did this, or I did that. Shut up. There's no excuses. It's your fault. If you get injured, it's your fault. And you know what? I'll be honest, that philosophy alone eliminates like 90% of people who will ever do jujitsu. It just eliminates them. Because the lack of, let's talk about this with somebody else in a different context, somebody we both know. I won't say his name, but we're talking about this today in a meeting that I was having. The lack of people intentionally accepting responsibility and accountability for all aspects of the process once they start the process leads to them accepting. I just made this click in my head. It leads to them accepting corrupt solutions, and they don't even know it's corrupt. They're just looking around for a solution to to get away from having the responsibility or the accountability, like your guy in his process. Yeah. Okay.
And again, don't mistake this for the idea or concept, because I really do subscribe to, in most cases, Occam's razor applies.
Right.
The simplest answer is usually the best one, but that doesn't mean that you take the fastest route. That's not the same thing. Taking shortcuts and trying to get around actually solving a problem, to your point, i.e., I'm not going to take responsibility for this, I'm just going to take the easiest solution possible. That's not Occam's razor.
That's not Occam's razor.
The same thing. That is not.
That's just corruption of Occam's razor. That's all it is.
Right. Exactly.
It's the corruption of Occam's razor, which, if you look at Bigger in Native Son, he's trying to find a shortcut. He's looking around trying to find a shortcut for everything. And it's interesting, after the murder and the cover-up process, he feels this sense of catharsis, and all of a sudden, and the word that keeps being repeated in the back part of book one is the word blind, right? He begins to see, or he begins to conceptualize other people as being blind. So he conceptualizes his mother as being blind. He conceptualizes his brother as being blind. He conceptualizes his sister. By the way, the sister is one of the more interesting characters in Native Son. She's leaving the house on the daily basis to go get educated. And to go, not necessarily a direct trajectory to a better life, but she's making the decision to go get an education, whereas he's making the decision to go off here and do this other thing. And I find that to be very interesting, particularly as it relates to our contemporary culture of 2024, where Black women outstrip Black men in getting degrees, and by the way, have for the last 30 years, at an almost 3-to-1 rate. It's like 3-to-1, 4-to-1. It's ridiculous. And by the way, not just getting degrees, getting them, completing them, and then going on to higher degrees. It's insane. Buddy of mine and I talk about this, particularly, actually not even just a buddy of mine. The Black men I know who have advanced degrees all talk about this, because as you go up higher and higher into education, the number of available Black women, paradoxically enough, begins to decrease, which gets into a whole other thing with who marries who and class. And then it becomes less about race and more about class at that point, which again, no one wants to talk about. Everybody, I remember that show, The Cosby Show, right? Before Bill Cosby was everything that we know
canceled.
About him now. Canceled. And Cliff Huxtable, every man wanted to be Cliff Huxtable, and every Cliff Huxtable wanted to find his Claire Huxtable, his Felicia Rashad. What they don't tell you is, though, the number of available Cliff Huxtables goes down the higher up you go. And so for every 3 Cliff Huxtables, there are 40 Felicia Rashads, but guess what? They're all hooked up already. You can't get them. And so you're in the situation that you're in. You're in the mating situation that you're in. It's brutal. It's brutal. And I've never talked about that on the podcast before, but trust me, you're a single, highly educated Black male. You know what I'm talking about. If you're listening to this podcast, you know precisely what I'm hitting on. And Tom is going to stand mute on this because he hasn't been single for many, many years. Back to the book. Back to Native Son. So, politics, right? So politics becomes a huge thing for Bigger in book one. Um, and he it manifests in a couple of different ways. And it's twisted in and it's combined in with Bigger's dysfunction as a leader. So I want to talk about those two things. So as we go into book as we go further into book one, Bigger leaves the house, he's smoking, he's looking at the poster of the state's attorneys general. He doesn't understand politics at all, and that's really the first clue that Wright gives you about Bigger. And it's really interesting because Bigger, in essence, stands in for what I believe are the 80% of Americans across all races who are just apolitical. They do not think about politics at all. Now, I think post 2020, that number went down from 80% to about 60%. Because of the lockdowns and because of all of these kinds of things that happen. All of a sudden, people who never had to care about politics now all of a sudden care about politics. They don't know what they believe. They don't know what they care about, but they know that there's this other thing that's been going on for a while that's over there that's somehow now impacted their lives. But in general, around 80% around only 20%, I think it is, of the available voting population actually is registered to vote. And I think of that 20%, I think it's less than 5 to 10 actually do vote in any given election. And then it just declines all the way down. The founding fathers would be ashamed of us, by the way. They would absolutely be ashamed.
For sure.
Because they understood something that Pericles, the Greek historian, all the way up to Carol Hanisch, the second wave feminist, understood. They understood that just because you don't care about politics cares about you. It cares about you in almost every single aspect of your life. And Bigger was confused by politics because of his lack of education, but that didn't mean that he was exempt. And he wasn't going to be exempt, by the way, because the things that are set up in book one eventually have political results in book three when he's being prosecuted.
Yeah.
Politics all of a sudden cared very much about him. The other dynamic that's political in this book, when Bigger starts talking to his gang about the robbery, is this idea of group identity and group solidarity and group unity, right? And so the one guy who won't go along, or he feels won't go along, so he's got Gus, he's got GH, and he's got Jack, and they're going to rob Bloom's Delicatessen, the white-owned delicatessen on the corner, while the cop's back is turned, right? Which I personally thought was a terrible plan, and I would have probably rejected it as well. Bigger proposes the robbery. I would have. Bigger proposes it's just poorly planned.
I think anybody normal, I think anybody with half a brain would have, but that's okay. Go ahead.
I'm like, yeah, that's, maybe we could do something better. Maybe there's something better if we're going to go down this road. I mean, come on. If we're going to engage in a criminal conspiracy, let's not be stupid about it. Okay,
right?
My God. But he assaults Gus, a violent assault, actually, after he comes back from the movie, the Traitor Sworn and the Gay Women, the double feature that he goes to see, the Gay Woman. And the Gay Woman, of course, is a second foreshadowing of what he is about to experience when he hooks up with the Dalton family as their chauffeur. And Bigger is envious of the white people and the Gay Woman. He doesn't know how to connect with them, but he lusts for what they have. And Wright, the irony is Wright then writes that the second movie holds almost no interest for Bigger. And the second movie is the movie of the Black Africans, basically, hanging out in Africa and doing African things and all this, right? Now, of course, during that time, Hollywood was making movies that were like this. They were making movies that were the white Hollywood, in some cases, white Jewish Hollywood stereotype of what Africans in Africa were actually like, right? And these are movies that we sometimes talk about, I get into the arguments about what movies could be remade. These are movies that can never be remade, ever. They are cultural artifacts, and they will stay in the past, preserved in amber, never to be revealed ever again. Because the level of bigotry and racism inside of them is just repugnant to modern ears. You couldn't redo anything in there, even though they may be artistic achievements. They may have some artistic merit, but there's too many other things in there. You can't pull it out. You can't separate it. Okay. Bigger's not interested in the bigoted description of Africa. He doesn't connect with it at all, but he connects very much with the white world that he's seeing in the gay woman. And then, of course, following the movie, Bigger goes back to the pool hall and he blows the gang up by violently assaulting Gus, who he fears isn't fully sold on the robbery plot. And that, of course, misses the window on them robbing the delicatessen. He blows up his own plan. Politics and the larger culture and violence, and of course this incredible winding thing of fear. Okay. Tom, I wanted to talk about the gay woman and the traitors. What's the name of that movie? It was The Traitor's Horn. I wanted to talk about that movie sequence in there because I thought it was funny. As a movie guy, I thought it was hilarious. He walks in with Jack. He's going to watch a double feature, and he can't really focus on the second movie like at all. Like it just slides past him. And I found it ironic and amusing because I remembered the blaxploitation films of the 1970s and the films that came out of a sense of, by the way, usually directed by Black directors, written by Black writers with Black actors, a sense of recapturing that sense of Black identity in film, right? And so all this history comes after Native Son, right? Or my history anyway comes after Native Son with this. And so I was fascinated by that piece of it from that perspective. And so there's a juxtapose there in my head. And then of course I move forward in my cinematic brain to the era of Spike Lee, and then the era of John Singletary, and finally to the era, we wash up on the shores of the era of Jordan Peele, where we are at now in our and Antoine Fuqua, where Antoine Fuqua can make, I just watched Equalizer 3, can make a movie like Equalizer 3, and it was not stunning, but I was like, okay, now we've arrived, where you could literally take Denzel Washington out of that movie, replace him with any white actor, and it would be fine. Yeah. It would be the exact same movie.
Actually, I'll go one step further, because think about the way that the Equalizer's personality is. There's a lot of, you could put Jason Statham in there. Yeah. You could put Jackie Chan for another, if it wasn't so serious, because Jackie Chan's more of a comedic action star, but whatever. But again, to your point, it doesn't have to even be white. You could put an Asian actor in there.
You could put Jet Li in there.
All right, let's not go too far here. Jet Li is on a level all by all of its own.
Well, he's old now. He's old now.
No. He can do that. only because of his stature, he always plays roles of being so underestimated.
Yeah, that's true.
And he really is not. He is a wushu champion and all these other. He's the real deal, everybody. Just to let you know, Jet Li could actually go win a real fight, real fight.
Yes,
letting you know.
He's not.
So anyway, yeah. But again, outside of Jet Li, but yeah, you're right. I actually think you're right. In that movie, I think you could have taken Denzel Washington out of there and put anybody you want in there that has some sort of action-ish mannerism to them. Liam Neeson. Right? Yeah. Like Liam Neeson could have done that movie easily. Or any one of the Skarsgårds.
That's true. No, you're right. You're not wrong. No, yes, you're absolutely correct. Yes.
but I think you're right. I think that was and by the way, I thought that was one of the better of the three movies. Like I actually liked some of the foundational stuff in there was decent. I liked there was like authenticity behind the Italian dialogue. Anyway, we could probably talk. That's a movie thing. Anyway, back to the book. We get sidetracked very easily with movies.
We do.
But to your point about recapturing the authenticity of your history, So we felt the same way when you talk about like spaghetti westerns, right? Where all
Hmm.
the native people were played by Italian people who were just really tan, right? Like
Right.
that was a real thing. People don't remember that natives didn't even have the opportunity to play themselves in their own in movies
Hmm.
until recently. And now we've got phenomenal depictions with Reservation Dogs and Dark Winds, and there's really good, and it's not just collaborated with native people, it's actually written, directed. A lot of the actors are native. Now, granted, they throw in some black and white natives in there too. I mean, I'm sorry, black and white actors too, but for the most part, it's native owned, native run, native directed. Like it's all about us, right? So to your point, and now the Native Son, the book Native Son didn't. I don't know if that had anything to do with that or not. I really don't. I don't think it did, but I think to your point, it's more of a societal thing that
Hmm.
shifted with the we saw what happened. We like this book kind of, and I may be wrong, but it kind of jump started some of the thought processes that people looked at this book and went, "Yeah, damn, we can't let that happen anymore." Or yeah,
I would
no, like
agree with that. I mean,
that's like
it was a book of the month club's month selection for at least a couple of years. And
yeah,
the average person who subscribed to the book of the month club, most people forget about this, but the average person who subscribed to book of the month club read anywhere between 10 to 20 books in a month.
yeah.
This was from a far more literate middle class society, book literate middle class society than we have now. Because, it's 1940. So television is not a thing.
Because the book's a movie now. You can
The
just
book,
watch the
right.
movie.
The book's a movie, right? Exactly. Yeah. So you had movie houses. You had movie houses. You had people who were in the outer ring of cities. Okay, living in the outer ring of cities, not quite suburbs, because that didn't happen until after World War II. But the suburbanization of America hadn't happened yet. So you didn't move from the inner city to the suburbs. You moved from the inner city to just a little bit towards the edges or the better part of the city or a different part of the city, particularly if you were in Harlem, Chicago, wherever, right? Any of those kinds of places, LA, wherever. And of course, redlining and blah, 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 blah. But there were better parts of these ethnic enclaves and there were worse parts of these ethnic enclaves. And everybody knows it, right? There were better parts of Watts and there were worse parts of Watts. Okay. But those people, they read books and they went to the movies because that was it. That was all you had. Oh, and they listened to the radio. So you had old time radio shows and things like that and all that kind of good stuff. But there was a sense, I think, or there's a sense that's portrayed in the book that, and it is a sense that we get in the Carol Hannish quote with the personal is political, that politics covered everything. And what do we do with the people? And again, there are still a ton of them who do not care about politics. They just don't. They're confused by the issues. They don't understand why it's a big deal. Here's a big one that I get from people when I sometimes if I'll be talking to them about something like this, they'll say, "Hey, son, I can't be involved in any of that. I'm just trying to live out here." That act of trying to live, and I'm sure you've run into this too. That act of trying to live, though, if you are a feminist leftist, is a political act. The political right has no comparative sort of idea, this sort of blank over there. And so a person is just left with this idea that everything I do has a political end. Even like what I pick to eat has a political end. Please. Or there's zero politics at all, and I'm just floating around here on top of the ether. Um, this is a question about leadership. How does a leader lead somebody who believes they're not political? And by the way, you sometimes see this in teams too, because sometimes people will be like, I don't know what just happened there. I have no idea what just happened. And it's a political thing that just happened, and they're confused. They don't even understand the assignment. What do you do with a person like that as a leader? I've struggled with that on team leading people who are just apolitical.
Well,
I
I
just want to
think
come here and work, man. I just want to do my assignments and go home.
which is okay. So from a leadership perspective, in the confines of a company,
Yeah.
fine, I understand that. But then if that's the attitude that you're going to take, then don't question my authority when I ask you to do something.
Okay.
right? Like so that's that setting expectations and being on the same
Yep.
playing field with each other. So listen, you either have to get elbow deep with me and you have to understand and do it. And if you want no part of that and you say I'm just here to do, then you are required by your own statement to just do what I ask you to do without question. Because if you start asking me questions, then guess what? You're not apolitical anymore. And then you are defining yourself back into the fold of being one of those people that needs to understand and needs to get like, okay, but you can't have it both ways. No, nobody can. Let's just face it. The phrase "you can't have your cake and eat it too" exists for a reason. We can't do that. Nobody can do that. It doesn't exist. It's an absolute fallacy to think that you can have everything you want in the world without any kind
But
of
Tom, you don't understand. I've got bigger things to think about, like my house or my boat, or like
sure.
I
How do
I, I
you
can't be
afford
thinking about this stuff at
how
work.
do you afford those things though? You afford those things because you work, and currently you work here. So you either
But
just
Tom,
simply
you don't
do what I ask you to do.
understand. Like I saw this thing on social media and that thing on social media. And now I got my friends asking me about this. And
Oh,
I
so then
just
you
want
are
to,
political. Okay, then let's talk about it.
no, I'm just hanging out on Facebook. That's not political.
Sure it is.
It can't. Why does everything have to be about politics with you political people? By the way, you could tell I've had these conversations
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
because
But again,
these are things I hear.
but again, see, here's where I get passive aggressive with these things, right?
Yeah.
I'd be looking at that person going, "My God, you're so right. You are absolutely right. I don't understand why people have to call." So what part of this checklist are you not going to get done? Like, just, okay, so you can't get number 4 done. Why is that again? Like this is on your list, right? So
Well,
why
okay. Well, let's be let's be kind to these folks and be generous. Let's
sure.
say that they lack education on what is actually political. How do we educate people on what that actually is?
Well, so I think that's a completely different problem, by the way. So somebody who just doesn't understand because they don't have the you know they don't have the education and or they don't have the wherewithal to go find out, right? Like let's just
Sure.
say that's not even a it's not even it's not even a mentality thing. It's just like they don't understand that they can go themselves go check these things out, right? And
Right.
figure out and fact check. Um, I think in those cases, then there's a little bit more kid glove kind of thing to in your thought process or in my thought process anyway. Whereas I want to make sure that I'm not force feeding them my own personal version of these things. I want to
Mm-hmm.
give them the ability to make up their own mind and make sure that they're so maybe just offering resources. Did you check this out? Did you look at this? Check out this website. Find a couple of things you want, and then let's talk about it. So give them an opportunity to go find out and learn, and because sometimes, and this is a different conversation where those same things that you're talking about, those task lists that maybe there's one or two that a person pushes back on. Well, sometimes it's because they don't know how to do it. Like it's not a political thing, or maybe the quote unquote political part of it is they feel like it's not their job or they're being weighted on, meaning like they're putting more weights being put on them than the rest of the team and so on and so forth. So again, they may not think it's political, but politics belong there because again, you're talking about distribution of work and making sure that it's fair and equitable for everybody involved. And sometimes it doesn't look that way on paper, but it might actually be, right? Like so there's certain components of it where um and I find this a lot with younger people, and I'm not suggesting it's because it's not an age discrimination thing. It's just more of a lack of experience. They haven't encountered it enough to really know and understand that sometimes when your checklist is longer, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing more work, right? Like
Right.
I have 12 things on I sorry, you have 12 things on your list. I have 5, but they don't understand that my 5 are 10 times more impactful than your 12 or more vital to the company and or are going to take me longer than your 12 to accomplish, right? Because of the value of them. So, I don't sometimes the younger generation doesn't they just don't have enough exposure to these things on a regular basis to understand that part of it. So you're right. It turns into a political thing without even purposefully being one.
Right.
I think in those cases, it really behooves us to make sure that we, number one, understand, like it goes back to, and I've made this statement a few times on your podcast here, Hassan, which is sometimes as a leader, you have to, don't just do something, stand there.
Right.
It's that
Yep.
exact opposite effect of what we're taught as young kids all the time. Don't just stand there, do something. We're always yelled at like when the feces is hitting the fan, right? We're all being told, like, you gotta go. Well, sometimes as leaders, you have to think of that in an opposite impact. And this is kind of one of those cases where instead of just reacting to it, stop for a second. Start understanding what they're meaning. Like, what is really the problem that they're trying to identify as a political, like they don't want to get involved in politics, but this kind of bothers me that I have this checklist and they have that checklist and whatnot. And
right.
so again, understanding where they're coming from sometimes can be a big change in their mannerisms and their attitude toward the quote unquote politicalness of it.
Well, and Wright was I mean, my God, this guy wrote 200 articles for the Daily Worker, the communist newspaper in Chicago. Like
the real one, by the way, not in the book. This is
the real one, the real Richard Wright. Yeah. Not I just want to make sure
we're clear on this.
Yeah.
This is not in the book. This is
not in the book.
Real. Yeah.
So he understood how, or not understood, he wrote essays in the communist paper that connected incidents that seemed to be apolitical to politics in order to persuade his reader that there was a political end, and the political end, of course, was revolutionary, a political revolutionary Marxist end to solve this problem. Because he wasn't writing recipes for the Daily Worker. He wasn't writing fun little anecdotes about the day I went to the beach. He wasn't writing any of that.
Or Dear Abby.
Right. He wasn't writing Dear Abby, Dear Comrade. Like, he wasn't writing that, Like, he was talking about, and he was writing about genuine issues that occurred inside of the various ethnic groups and worker class groups, not working class, working class and other groups, in opposition to the middle class and in opposition to the elite, as was identified in Chicago in the 1940s and 1930s, and in the United States broader overall. He was writing articles trying to get people to take political action from such innocuous things as, I didn't get paid the right amount of money in my check this week. Right. Or, I don't know, should we go on strike because the working hours are too long? Or this steel made in this plant isn't up to quality and the manager won't listen to me. Like, those kinds of things could be weaved into a Daily Worker story to convince people to take up the glorious Marxist revolution by Richard Wright. And I'm sure he received pushback from people. I'm sure he did in the Black community. I'm sure he did. From people who told him, yo, man, my name is Paul, and that sounds like that's between y'all. And then just walked away. Who didn't want to be involved in the glorious revolution. Who did just want to show up to their jobs, get whatever pay the boss was going to give them, take their pay, and walk away and go home. Because they got to live their life. They can't be involved in politics.
But people don't realize that itself is a political statement all by itself.
I understand. And I'm saying that Wright faced this dynamic all the time, and I'm sure it frustrated him. I'm sure it drove him crazy because his writing, his posture, from his perspective, was a political one from the jump. He saw his writing as a political act. He saw his creativity as serving politics. Now, I'm of the opinion that actually degenerates your art. Like, you could have a few, and I've seen this with a lot of artists. For God's sakes, I went to school for art. See this with a lot of artists. The second an artist allows their talent to serve a particular agenda, now we're into something else. And it might be technically beautiful, but it's not art. Now it's propaganda. And I'm not saying that Native Son becomes propaganda. What I am saying is that Native Son, and I have not, I have not read subsequent things that Richard Wright wrote, and he wrote several different novels and nonfiction pieces and all this kind of stuff. He was a prolific writer, but I wonder, and maybe I just need to do more research into the space with him and read more of his stuff. But I wonder if at some point in time he tipped into that propaganda space, or if he was constantly walking that line.
Oh, don't mistake this. I thought you were going to say something different, a little bit different, because I think that's exactly what it is.
Oh, you think? Okay,
This.
okay,
Think about this for a second. The lawyer that defends it, and I know we didn't get that far, and
yeah.
I'm guessing at this because we've been at this now for almost 2 hours. So I'm assuming,
yeah,
I'm
we're going to be
guessing
wrapping up here in a bit.
yeah, we're not going to get quite to this, but think about this for a second. The attorney that he uses is part of the Communist Party in the book, right?
Yep.
So he brings that politicalness into the book. Number one. Number two, he leveraged it. He ends up buying into the fact that the attorney is on his side, meaning now he's looking at the attorney not necessarily as a peer in the way that we think of it today, but he's starting to buy into that communist Marxist thought process that we're now the same because we're on the same side. Right. Like, so I think I thought where you were going with that was that he was leveraging the book as propaganda, because I think it is. I think that's exactly what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to use that book as leverage, as to say, read this book and then come to us, because you'll understand this whole movement once you see what I did here with these white people that now like this black guy, and it's 1930 and they're not supposed to like each other, but they do. And it's because of the tide to the Communist Party that you know what I'm saying?
Like that ties them together. Yeah.
I thought that's where he was. That's exactly where I thought he was going with this. My mind jumped there right away.
Well, and I think, yeah. And this is a way bigger question that's beyond the ken of us to be able to discuss today, to your point. At what point in time, or not what point in time, can propaganda actually be good? Like, can propaganda be quality? And that
sounds like a panel discussion conversation.
That is a yawning chasm of a question. Yeah. I absolutely acknowledge it, and I have some thoughts on that from looking at Soviet realist art produced during during Stalin's time in Russia, that technically is very good and technically ranks with anything the Impressionists did, ranks with anything that was done in quote unquote Western art in the 19th century previous, but is taken by Western critics as being stilted and unart-like.
Yeah, very jaded.
Very jaded, right? And they shove it all into the propaganda realm, and they just discount it and dismiss it and don't even look at it. And to me, that's cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah.
And it kind of doesn't work. Now, where I will say this, and again, it's a yawning chasm of a conversation, but I will say this. One of my main concerns with some of the things we're doing in cinema today is that I think we've tipped over from art in some cases to propaganda. And it's because there's so many other openings and so many other places to just do quote unquote art, which means the quality level or the things required to produce something of quality, like getting your reps in with just writing articles like Richard Wright did. That's just getting your reps in. You're going to become a better writer by writing more, just like you're going to become a better YouTube content producer by doing what? Well, by producing more YouTube content. Okay. But there's so much milk, to use an analogy here, there's so much milk that there very little cream rises to the top anymore. At least my concern is that. And so I wonder if it's easier to just do propaganda than it is to do art. Anyway,
that's a different question, though.
It's a different question.
It's a different question than you just asked.
It is.
You asked if propaganda can be good. Like, not
right. Like, well, can propaganda be good art? Can it be good art? Or
okay, well, again, that's three different questions.
Three different questions. I know, because I'm thinking out loud.
No, but what I was getting at is I actually think all three of those questions, that is like a phenomenal. That would be a panel discussion that I would love to watch. Like, I would love to see. and
Well,
be
maybe
it.
we'll put, maybe
I
we'll
would
put that
love
together.
to be a fly on the wall and listen to people much smarter than me debate that, because I think that would be fascinating to listen to.
Well, it can, and particularly in light of where we live currently, and the kind of space in which we live currently, with books and podcasts and movies and quote unquote content, Pache, Martin Scorsese, whatever that may mean. Like all of the to answer those questions requires a conversation with people who are steeped in not critical theory, but steeped in critical analysis of these pieces, and who have enough of a historical or enough of a hold on the historical depth and breadth of artistic creation in the West to be able to have that sort of conversation. And
I
it
mean,
would be fascinating
the
to me.
simplest answer I think is yes, right? I think propaganda can be good, sure, if it serves multiple purposes. I think if it's not, like, if it serves if it's a multi-purpose thing, then yes, it can still be good, because you can dislike it for purpose A, but appreciate it for purpose B. Like but I don't know if that's a simple enough. I don't think if we could apply that to everything, though. That's the problem.
Well, and I think we better start having this. We better start having this conversation at some level or another, because the large language algorithms are spitting out imagery right now, and the imagery is getting better and better. I mean, I remember when it first started, it was clearly terrible. It's getting better and better. Still looks fake. It's like like Marty McFly in Back to the Future Part 2 when he goes to the future and
Yeah,
the Jaws thing comes out and he's like, the shark still looks fake. And he
yeah,
like straightens up and just walks away. I love that. That's how I feel about all this large language algorithm produced art. Still looks fake, right? And at a certain point, as the prompts get better, the art will get better. I'm not too arrogant to admit that. Well, if the prompts are based in propaganda, or if there's not a good understanding about the line between propaganda and art, the way that Richard Wright understood the line between propaganda and art in Native Son and all of his other writings, if there's not an understanding of that by people producing quality, then we're going to be into some deep water. And I don't know how we swim out of that.
interesting.
Anyway, I'd like to wrap up today. I don't even think we resolved anything. This is the
I
first
don't think so
podcast
either.
we've done where I don't think we resolved anything.
I mean,
Wow, it's been a long time.
there's a little nugget or two in there, but they're not big nuggets. That's the,
No,
like, yeah,
no, it's going into a gold mine, and you got to do a little
yeah, exactly.
little
Just
sifting.
remember, flakes of gold are worth thousands of dollars.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.